Hello and welcome to the ASB Investment Podcast, the show that keeps you up to date on the markets and helps you make smart choices with your investments. These are entirely our own views and that of our guests. It's not investment advice, but we know plenty of experts at ASB that will be happy to chat if you need. Well, welcome back to yet another ASB Investment Podcast episode. We have an action-packed episode for you today, one that brings the very best from across the globe right to you. So whether that's while you're out walking the dog, on the treadmill at the gym, or driving to work, this one will set you up perfectly for the week ahead. Our very special guest today is someone who I could listen to talk all day. We've had him on the show before. I think it was 2 years, apparently, since we've had you there. I thought it was a lot less between drinks. It's none other than Ben Powell, the Chief Investment Strategist at APAC and the Middle East for the BlackRock Investment Institute. Welcome back, Ben, and it's good to be back in New Zealand.
Always great to be back in New Zealand. Yeah, I started coming here nearly 30 years ago for rugby-related reasons.
Yes.
That didn't work out, so I've had to go into asset management and whatnot, and enjoying it so far. So great to be back, yes.
And you were a flanker, was that right?
Yeah, I tried. It's a big claim, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I was tall, so line-out option, but the problem with being tall and gangly, as well as being called Bean Pole, which was sort of funny, right? Back in the day, was I was a pretty good target, I got to say. So unfortunately, I had to go into other things, which was better for everyone, I think.
Well, we're lucky that you did. And you've recently changed roles and moved to Abu Dhabi. Tell us about the change, if the role changed or not, but has it given you a new perspective being there on markets and what's driving things around the world?
A bit, yeah. So I had 15 years in Asia. It was amazing. 5 years Hong Kong, 10 years Singapore. Only good things to say. And an opportunity, I guess, came up in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi specifically, for personal and professional reasons. We thought it was worth going for. So we've moved there. And what I would say is this is a global story. Obviously, the artificial intelligence super boom is ongoing. And it is, to some degree, being made in the UAE. And there's an obvious reason for that, which is, same as me and you, right? So you need energy to do your thinking. Same for the AI kind of silicon brain. It also needs energy, and Abu Dhabi's got lots of that. So that is literally, you can see the kind of growth of AI. So I would say, in general, it's a fantastic place to live. My family's very, very happy. And in terms of how it's changed my perspective, the centrality of energy to the AI story, you can literally see it out of our windows and whatnot. So that's been quite interesting.
Yeah, and so is that because there's, excuse my naivety, but that's because there's data centers being built there, or it's because basically the energy is being farmed there and then sent out?
All of the above. So you want proximity, if you can, you want the energy moving not that far. So it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because artificial intelligence, I know it seems like magic. It seems like it just appears, but it is a physical thing, right? You can actually stub your toe on AI. So what you want is loads of energy, kind of a friendly regulatory environment to get the energy going, get the connectivity into the silicon brain. So they come as a package, right? So you want them close together, and that's what, I shouldn't speak on behalf of the UAE, but I think just as a fact, there is a kind of pleasing combination of factors, including energy, to allow that data center expansion, which is so obviously very, very important in terms of creating the scale of the AI kind of compute power. There's other aspects, right? So the so-called DeepSeek moment earlier this year, Nigel suggested we also want to be clever in how we use it, elegantly using that scale, but we also just need the heft, right? We just need the whole thing. And I think those energy abundant kind of places they have at least an advantage, right? If you've got the energy, that's pretty important. You need some other stuff as well, but energy is on the list, maybe towards the top of the list. And I think that is why one of the key reasons we're seeing data center kind of expansion, even a boom in the Middle East, is the proximity to energy.
Yeah, it's sort of unlimited energy. Also, I've heard the average data center can only be down 6 seconds a year or something like that. So you want an unbroken stream of power.
That's exactly right. So you can't have a laggy connection, right? It's got to be reliable because if it did go hot, so there's a few things they use energy before, but critically keeping the data center operating at its optimal temperature, cool, is critical. So if the fridge goes off and you lose, literally billions and billions and billions, that would be inconvenient. Therefore, avoiding that is something that the sector takes, of course, extremely seriously. So trusting in your energy supply is critical.
So today we're going to get your view on the state of the global market environment, with a lot of that feeding into what we know as the BII, or Investment Institute's Midyear Outlook. Fan club members will recall we've had David Griffith on before discussing the report and kind of how that's been impacting management of our portfolios. But your eloquent way of words, what's a quick overview of the main themes? Has anything changed, or?
Yeah, everything changes but you, to quote Take That, if I remember rightly. So yes, we're in a totally different investment kind of context. As you may have noticed, the world seems extremely complicated in really every dimension, Nigel. So geopolitical stuff through to more boring but important economics-y stuff, inflation, cash path, meaning interest rates, and sort of everything. So as investors, that might make us sad, but we've just got to get on with it. So we feel
Play
like
the hand you've got.
That's your only choice, sadly, right? So, and we would say from a BlackRock perspective that kind of waiting for certainty or clearer skies, sadly, you're going to be waiting a long time in our assessment. So number one is some version of crack on and play the cards you've got. That's what we've got to do. Number two, I would say the macro uncertainty is very, very high. So interestingly, Chair Powell at the recent kind of Fed announcement, he said very, very openly, I haven't got the quote in front of me, so
this is today's one?
This is the very recent one. So he said, it's not incredibly obvious what we should do from here, which I thought was a very, very honest and sort of appropriate comment about the uncertainty of the inflation future. How much is the labour market slowing? It's genuinely very, very complicated. So to be so confident on the macro kind of frame is hard these days. So that's kind of unsettling. In the olden days, the Great Moderation, inflation was low, interest rates were low, and we could kind of relax because we knew if things went a bit wrong, don't worry, they can cut rates and look after us. And now they can't. And that's very, very different. So what we do have some certainty in, or at least some confidence in, is what we call the mega forces, Nigel. I won't list them here now. We can maybe go through them a bit later. Yeah. But this is a much more kind of thematic approach to what we would think of as portfolio anchors. If you can't just relax into the central banker kind of cuddle, because it's more difficult for them, we need to find something we can have confidence and conviction in. And those are some of our kind of big thematic calls. AI is one of them, by the way. There are 4 others. So that's really how we've evolved, how we want to think about portfolio construction. Recognition we're in a different environment and trying to adapt accordingly, I guess, is something like the name of the game.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those anchors, because I've got to know the term and kind of what's behind it over the last couple of years. But what is the changing of, I guess, these anchors, the losing of the long-term original ones, and why is that so important?
Because it somewhat necessitates a change of investing approach. So we think it's going to be kind of required moving forward to do a couple of things. One is to be a little bit more specific and targeted in exactly what risk you want in your portfolios. So before, again, sorry to go on about the Great Moderation, but the contrast I think is like helpful. Let's see, but I'm hopeful it is. So during that Great Moderation, you could just be what people called risk on, right? You could just be long risk. Now, it does feel like a much more nuanced kind of call. You know, sadly, you can turn on the TV and see the world geopolitically is fragmenting in a few different ways.
So before, like, just buy the market and hold on.
And it worked really well, right? So I'm not condescending that approach. It was great, right? And worked for 10 years and more after the GFC through COVID. And you've still got to have a risk call, right? So, you know, I can come to that a bit later. But we do think in a kind of fragmenting world, being a bit more thoughtful around different asset classes that we can have in the portfolio. You know, maybe infrastructure starts to make an appearance, whatever, gold, you know, you can take that thought in many different directions. But to make your own point back to you, Nigel, it isn't just risk on, right? It isn't just like be long anything and you'll be all right. That worked. But now we think you've got to be a bit more sophisticated and do a little bit more work in terms of sourcing diversification and trying to think about different places to put your money, which in aggregate can give you what it is that you need. So a little bit more hard work, we think, is a necessary consequence of trying to deal with a more complicated world.
I guess, apart from listening to conversations that you're in, podcasts like these, are there, you know, what practical steps can investors take to kind of adapt? Is it just simply opening their eyes to more things and listening to the world around them?
I would try and open your eyes to fewer things. So
less noise.
So what do you really believe? Because as we all are aware, there is infinite opinion, noise, context, social media, like all of that, right? So we all do it. It's good fun, but like be careful. It can confuse you and really muddy the waters. And this year's actually been quite an interesting example. If we think about, this was more than noise, right? The Liberation Day brouhaha, Nigel, was a real thing, right? But actually with hindsight, and to be fair to us, we did make this call at the time. With hindsight, that was a moment where you could say, this is obviously interesting, but does it really change our core belief in artificial intelligence, just as an example?
The anchor.
The anchor. And the answer was no, it didn't. We stuck with it and we get things wrong, but that one's been a good call. So that's what we think is important. Like, stay totally focused as best you can on what you really believe to be true. You know, obviously be open-minded. We can all be wrong. So I'm not saying it's like a religious conviction, but try and stay focused on what you believe to be true. Anchor your portfolio in that. And therefore, if we can, try and avoid being whipsawed around by what is a very noisy, and sadly, I think that's only going to continue and maybe even get worse or busier, let's say, for many many years to come. So really stick to your knitting. So we've got 5 megaforces. I've got 1 wife and 4 children, which, if I get it right, sums to 5. So I've got 2 photos behind my...
So you've got dueling 5 megaforces.
So they rank pari passu, Nigel. So they are, so I've got 2 photos behind my screen. One is wife and family. The other is the 5 megaforces, and they are both high conviction longs.
You can't really sell them short, can you?
I wouldn't dare try, but no, that's right. We stick to what we believe in. Family's one, that's a different podcast, I guess, and Megaforces is other. And that's worked reasonably well for us, actually, in, as I say, what has obviously been a very busy world over the last year or two. For us, sort of explains, how can the world be so, frankly, scary and confusing? And yet, if you look at certain risk markets out there, US equity markets come to mind, they've obviously had a very good run after that April the 9th dramatic moment. And for example, that conviction around AI, I think, is to some degree explanatory as to how both of those things can be true. World is scary, yet S&P doing really, really well. That's something like our explanation as to how to square that circle.
Yeah, and so it's the megaforces. We have AI, we have energy transition, we have future of finance, we have...
demographic divergence and geopolitical fragmentation.
Okay.
And so, they're all my favourites, as I say to my children as well. So they're all my favourite. But geopolitical fragmentation is quite interesting because on the face of it, that is scary, right? Sounds scary and probably is scary. But you can think about, actually, that presents certain opportunities, be that by sectors. Sadly, the defence sector is going to have some tailwinds caused by that geopolitical concern. Obviously, as humans, we worry about many things. But as investors, the responsibility we have at BlackRock is to think about how we can help people achieve their portfolio goals, right? So even the scary stuff, we've got to think about, okay, not great, but in terms of a practical professional manner, how can that create actually opportunity? So you can think about sectors. You can also think about geographies. So in a world that does seem to be kind of polarizing, at least to some degree, there are lots of countries in the middle who maybe have got the opportunity to kind of think about how we can be cute here and try and a little bit win from both sides, right? You've got to be careful. That's easier said than done. Anyway, I'm droning on. The point here is even a megaforce like geopolitical fragmentation, which on net sounds like a negative, actually creates a specific positive opportunities. And that's kind of the mindset I think I'm trying to talk to here, is just trying to think about how we incorporate the complexity of the world into portfolio opportunities.
Cause and effect. Things happen over here that can lead to opportunities on the other side. Is there any of the mega forces? I know you love them all. They're all going to go on to have, wonderful lives. But is there one that stands out as the biggest or the most important?
They're all interlinked, right? So, you can think about energy and AI, for example, as being approximately the same thing as per the, the friendly opening we had. But right now, I do think, we are at a hinge moment in human history where we go from having carbon intelligence to a new kid on the block, right? Silicon intelligence. I don't know. It seems to me that's hard to exaggerate. It's at least kind of steam and electricity. It might even be fire, right? In terms of historical comparisons. So there's that. But our job is to turn it from kind of very interesting dinner party chat, which we're all having, right? What does it mean for our children in 15 years' time? Don't get me wrong. Super important, obviously, but not obvious how you would incorporate that into a portfolio. So
at first glance or discussion? Or?
So for the AI super boom, which we think is real, we need to be very focused on when we are in the story. So for me and for us, it's going to be something like a 3-stage journey. I'll start in the future and move back to today. So in the future, I'll be a bit vague, let's say 10 years, something like this, 10 to 15 years, societal transformation. So that seems quite likely that it's going to have meaningful implications, not just for GDP and stuff, but for life.
So it's being used.
Yes, it's being used, but it's fundamentally changed the nature of society.
How we do things.
That's very important, but that's not today. And reasonable people can disagree on what that looks like. It could be a good outcome, Star Trek The Next Generation. It could be a bad outcome. I'll just leave that one hanging. So that's kind of stage 3. Stage 2, which we should get to relatively soon, not quite there yet, though, is adoption by companies, by sectors, by individuals, driving individual productivity gains, if you like. So what that would mean for a company is becoming more efficient and driving positive earnings surprises. That should come relatively soon. So we're watching closely, and there's kind of a few hints here and there, but it's not quite yet. Where we are, or when we are now, at least for us at the BlackRock Investment Institute, is the build-out phase. Yes. So this is just a fact, right? So this is not theoretical. What's it going to look like in 10 years? It is a deluge of money pouring into the ecosystem. And this is why, it isn't just the chips. The chips are very important, but it's the energy architecture, it's the data center, all of that stuff, right? So that to us seems to be how to try and take the fun out of AI in a way, right? So it's obviously super interesting, and I'm super interested, but in the day job, okay, cool, but what does that actually mean for portfolio opportunities? And for us right now, it continues, and in all candor, as it has for the last year and more, we think that's got more room to run in terms of the CapEx build out and just the money that's flowing through and the recipients of that money benefiting.
Did I see a graph where it's now contributing more to US GDP than the traditional heavyweight being consumer spending?
It's a lot. So numbers vary, and I want to be appropriately vague and uncertain, but it's something like $500 billion.
In a year.
In a year, to be vague. It's a lot, right? It's relevant. So global GDP in super round numbers, don't quote this at dinner parties because it's not exactly right, but just to keep the maths easy, global GDP is $100 trillion. So I speak on behalf of the planet, we are spending like 0.5% of GDP every year, and that number's going up, by the way. It looks like it's going up. So that is, astonishing. Like, this is absolutely up there with railroad booms, whatever your favorite kind of historical example might be. So that would seem to have extreme relevance to the economy, as you're talking to, Nigel, and to markets. And so it's no surprise to me that it is kind of the dominant or a very important market narrative. If you force me, grudgingly, to kind of highlight one, they're all great. I love all the mega forces. Really, I think they are. But AI is so fascinating as a human and relevant as a market professional, I kind of feel I have to go there.
I guess, as you say, it's sort of also as a derivative and so interrelated with the other ones. Are there any, I can feel it sort of as a listener standing there going, but bubble. Or are there any unintended consequences that come with any of the mega forces, or if you want to focus on just AI?
So just to pick up the bubble you casually put down there, yeah?
Yes.
I don't think so, right? So, you want to be nervous. If people are happy, you want to be nervous. If people are kind of miserable, you want to think about, this feels like an opportunity. So my tummy agrees with the sort of thrust of your question. But as a matter of fact, if you think about the 90s, let's say, the late 90s, a lot of those companies, they made no money, right? They didn't make any earnings. Some of them didn't make any revenue, right? They were just a dream.
Shell.
I mean, so that is a genuine just euphoria. We can debate if there's a euphoria here, but there's also definitely money.
Yes.
Right? These companies, they might be the best companies that have ever existed in terms of their ability to make money, turn it into cash flow and continue. Now, at some stage, that will stop being true between now and the end of time, Nigel. But for now, as we sit here in September 2025, it feels like that's got more legs. So I hear it, I understand it, but we just look at the money they're making, and that is real. Obviously, we're trying to be a sober kind of a professional investor, and we're doing the stuff that you would do on valuation and prospective positive revenue surprises, positive earnings surprises, all of that jazz, and that continues to be a good story, I guess, simply put. So we think that that's going to continue.
So another well-known BlackRock leader who I follow, Mr. Rick Reeder, mentioned a couple of weeks back on CNBC that this was one of, if not the best environment for investing that he had seen in his career. Among the things driving that he was saying was, investors can generate decent yields on fixed income and a lot of equities, like exactly what you're talking about. Whilst a bit elevated in their valuations, they're just extremely efficient at making a return on their equity.
Exactly. So, we had a tough decade or two where interest rates were zero and therefore income was hard. I mean, we tried our best and I hope we did a pretty good job, but it was definitely hard. Now, income is obviously much more straightforward. You still got to work hard, but it is at least the yields are a lot higher than they were during that pre-COVID time. So income is relatively more straightforward and opportunities in a very interesting moment in kind of the economy's evolution are out there. They're out there in terms of technological change. They're out there in terms of certain emerging markets really moving forward in leaps and bounds. So however you kind of cut the cake, it feels like there's a pleasing combination of income, which is available, and opportunity. And to Rick's point, that feels like a good time to be an investor.
What are your, I guess, whether it's the BII's or your personal view, the sort of tactical and strategic calls for the second half of the year?
So we would keep on with the US for some of the reasons I've mentioned. Just to, fess up, Nigel, we are, nervous about the concentration risk, right? We understand that. We read the papers. But again, the revenue earnings positivity continues to dominate. So we stay overweight US equities.
So US exceptionalism's still alive and well?
Yeah, I think so. Look, there's interesting questions around that. But the reality is the future still gets imagined, designed, built, monetized in America, disproportionately. Yeah. Many honorable mentions all around the planet, but it's still kind of Silicon Valley and then maybe New York to fund it and then whatever. So it's
the king is not dead.
I don't think so. So, but we don't want to have all of our eggs in one basket, even if it's a beautiful basket. So we think about, of course, allocation into other things. So Japan is somewhere we continue to like, quite a fun corporate governance reform story, companies treating shareholders better. We think about selective kind of emerging markets as a place where we can get pretty good yields, actually, and so on. So America, still an amazing place, that's for sure. But again, the whole, as every strategist ever has always said, diversification is the closest thing we can get to a free lunch. So that's still important, and we are thoughtful around that, including in, as I say, Japan, select emerging markets, and a few other bits and pieces here and there.
And conversely, any areas for caution?
We're still a bit nervous about inflation, actually.
Right.
So
you've got higher for longer.
So we've had this view for like 3 or 4 years now that there are structural drivers of inflation, which means it's going to hang around. And the market's kind of gone hot and cold on that over the last 3 or 4 years. And for the moment is of the view that inflation is like not as important as growth. The challenge I would have for that is the Fed's got a mandate, meaning mandatory, meaning they can't just forget one.
Dual mandate.
Dual mandate. Growth is very important, part of the mandate, but so is inflation. So a slight concern we've got is inflation is a bit above target already in the US, and that's probably before some of the price increasing consequences of the tariffs feed through. So, we're watching that very, very carefully and are a little bit nervous about inflation complacency, let's say. So that's something that we're keeping half an eye on.
Well, I saw this morning, I think, on the dot plot, and for those that don't know, the Fed comes out and it sort of gives an indication of anonymously where people are thinking. I saw one potentially new member to the Fed board was on their personal dots, 5 more cuts this year.
That did seem an isolated view.
Yes,
so
it was, wasn't it?
It was. So I still think the blended mean of the Fed voters is 1 or 2, right? So, and fair enough, right? So, there are genuine concerns about the job market. So 1 or 2 more seems reasonable. But I have to say, or we have to say from the BlackRock Investment Institute, that 6 or 7 or 8 more through the end of 2026, right? Through the end of next year. I have to say that seems like a lot in a world that inflation is like quite appreciably above targets and maybe going higher. So a couple, that's fine, more than fine. That's useful, obviously, for risk and for markets in general. So I don't want to be a killjoy here, right? Like, that's good, but I'd be a bit nervous about kind of extrapolating that forward all the way through to the end of next year and saying we're going to get almost not a panic-driven cutting cycle, but a very, very urgent cutting cycle.
Which has its own other set of problems.
And Chair Powell and others know that, right? So inflation's already too high. If you're too aggressive in terms of cutting, you could make that inflation even worse, and then you're in a really tricky spot.
Yeah, or what am I not seeing here? Wherein growth has really fallen off.
So if the growth picture deteriorates like a lot,
cutting.
Fair enough, right? But that's not where we are today, right? Growth is chugging along okay. Consumer data has actually been all right. That's 70% of the US economy. So if the US consumer is in aggregate like okay, not rampant, not surging, but sort of chugging along, as I say, it's not obvious there should be an emergency rate cut sort of cycle over the next year or so. So that's something we're a little bit nervous around, is the optimism around how many cuts the Fed can do. A couple, fine. 6 or 7 or 8 seems a bit of a stretch to us.
And credit where credit's due. You guys have said that, and you've been right on the terms of the inflation picture.
That's very generous of you to remember, Nigel. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I study my guests' work extensively. Final question before we get to the wrap up: is there, or what do you think is a big misconception you think investors or other commentators, strategists have about today's markets? Is there one?
Well, so for investors, for everyone out there, like the risk of not being invested. So, we live in a risky, complicated world. That's true. But this year has been a sharp, harsh reminder of the risk of not being invested. Absolutely. You could have worried about many things on the TV over the last 12 months, for sure.
Yes.
But it's turned out that sticking true to your portfolio goals, having a reasonable portfolio allocation in line with whatever it is you're trying to do, fund a retirement, put your kids through college, whatever it is you're trying, just sticking to your core convictions is important, because if you don't, you might miss a 30% rally in the equity market, and that's super inconvenient.
Correct.
So the risk of not being invested is also a risk. And I think sometimes people get a bit confused about that. 25 has been a kind of an example of exactly that phenomenon, I think.
Yeah, bulls make money, but bears sound smart.
Stick to your convictions. So focus on the liability side. What are you trying to fund?
Yeah.
Put your kids through school and just keep that goal relentlessly in focus. Have a portfolio that makes sense in that regard, and then be hard to move, right? Stick there, and it really has to be overwhelming evidence for you to kind of change your core convictions before. It's got to be more than just a mean tweet, I think, to get
I guess
change.
to use your example, like that data center in Abu Dhabi is still getting built regardless of what tweet there is each morning.
So core convictions, right? So what do we believe to be true? AI is one, energy transition, demographic divergence, and so on. So we believe those are true facts, I think, as the kids say these days, Nigel. So and yes, they can withstand significant news flow and buffeting around and challenges. So that's why they are, in our assessment, mega forces. They're not trivial, they're profound, and we think they're here to stay.
as always, it's been thoroughly enjoyable having you here. I hope the audience can sort of realise that I'm not sure if Ben could have, but I could have kept going for hours and just kept cooking on uncontrollably. But, thank you again for discussing your thoughts on markets as always. And I guess, like, to that last point as well, what investors should keep thinking about. Now, as we wrap up, that final question we always go to, it's our typical question. And I follow Ben on LinkedIn, and I know you've been posting. Are you still doing the weekly reading?
Yes, I've got a bit lazy. Sorry. I
haven't seen one for a few weeks.
I know, mate. Sorry about that. Yes, they will be back because I'm addicted to books, which, as my dad said to me a long time ago, is, in the scheme of addictions, is probably not a bad one. But yes, that's still an addiction, yes.
And so with that, is there anything you've been reading, listening to, or watching that you could recommend?
2 books. One is called Shattered Lands. It's a history of the British in kind of India, which in the old days was much bigger. So it included, by the way, a lot of the UAE, Aden, all the way across to Myanmar and so on. So kind of how that stopped and the creation of those many new, or relatively more countries is super interesting, kind of tumultuous, but like quite fascinating. So that's one. And then 2, as mentioned, I've got some children, so we're doing Harry Potter again, which I did 20 years ago. And I have to tell you, I mean, it's just so good. So that's giving me a lot of joy. The main reason you have kids is so you can do stuff you secretly enjoy, right?
Yes.
And they're a cover story. So getting back into Harry Potter using the cover of Bedtime Stories has been a thrill. So an oldie, 20 years ago since Harry Potter 7 was published, I think. So, an oldie, but still a goodie, Nigel.
Do you narrate it with your voice?
I do, yeah. So it's quite hard because we've got 4 kids. So I try and if I can, synergize and read from the central hallway, or I've got to do 3 or 4 versions of the same thing. But whatever it takes, right, with kids, you can't be too rational there because ultimately, I guess, grudgingly, we love them, don't we? So
I can imagine you give Stephen, I think Stephen Fry's narrated them before, but I can imagine you'd give him a run for your money. So my recommendation was simply, if people want to follow your stuff, because I know you do the book reviews, but I've also seen you've been doing videos from wherever you are in the world. They just follow you on LinkedIn. Would that be the best?
Yeah, absolutely. Give it a go. So have a look. If you don't like it, click off. But yes, we try and be useful, putting up a couple of our, the main views. Again, we don't want to be spamming people, so we try and just put stuff that we think is useful. And then, Nigel, to your point, a little bit of stuff I'm genuinely interested and feel passionate about, including Auckland, of course. So we'll be doing one of those short videos from Auckland in some period of time. So that one's coming relatively soon.
And so with that, we're done for another episode. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming in. I know you run a very, very tight schedule when you're here. Thank you for coming and spending time with us. I hope you had another fun trip to NZ and you got some good questions from New Zealand audiences.
Yeah, of course. No. So it's always good to come down. As I say, I've got some history in non-work related rugby stuff. So yeah, a lot of happy memories here, and pleased to make some more with you, Nigel, today. So thanks for having me.
Oh, we hope to have you back. And to you out there, whether it's on your way to work, at the gym, or even doing the gardening on the weekend like I do with a podcast in the year, thanks again for your support of the ASB Investment Podcast. Until next time, it's happy investing and bye for now. Thanks for listening to the ASB Investment Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this episode, or if there's anything you'd like us to discuss on a future show, get in touch with us at podcasts@asb.co.nz.